food, we got no jobs, our pets' heads are falling off. Welcome into the Bro 4 Squad podcast. This is episode 49. Thank you so much for joining us. We are just a bunch of bros drinking beer and talking movies. I am your host, Jeff Hornacek. Very special episode for you tonight. Joining me is my partner in crime, a good friend of the pod, who is no longer allowed at any YMCA locations in the greater Memphis area, Nate Thurman. Nate, how's the appeal with the aquatics director looking these days?
You know, to be honest, it's going swimmingly.
Oh, God.
We're actually, you see that. I think we're going to get that appeal down to just West Memphis, so the Arkansas side. I think it's going to turn out great.
Unbelievable that you just fucking said that.
I'm working on my dad jokes.
Jesus. And I will say this, the West Memphis ones, the shittier YMCA locations in the greater
Yeah, you don't
Memphis.
even want to go to those anyway. You'll definitely get the HIV.
It's probably a win for you, yeah. All right, if you guys have not checked out our show before, thank you so much for listening to us. We like to break our show down into three categories. The first is the most important thing in any bro's life, and that is chest day. And Nate, you actually had this idea, and I'm glad we did it. We talked about it a little bit last year, had the debate about halfway through 2017 after we had seen Get Out and Split, Spider-Man Homecoming and Wonder Woman, and a bunch of other awesome movies, asking ourselves, what is the best year of all time for movies? Now, 2018 looks like it'll be able to hold its own so far as well, but we'd like to start a series on tonight's episode that, honestly, who knows, we probably will never finish it or come to a definitive conclusion, of looking back at some years past, seeing if they can step up to the plate and make a case as the strongest collective year of filmmaking awesomeness of all time. So, tonight we start with 1994. Roll your clocks back. Jeff Hornacek was 7 years old, ODing on sugary cereals every Saturday morning. And Nate, before we get into this, anything right off the bat before we break the categories of all these movies down into threes about 94 that you just want our people to know, or that really stood out to you before we looked at these?
Yeah, 94 was a great year. It gets skipped over a bunch, but once you break these down the way we have, you really see that there were some really big box office hits. These were some formative years for us growing up, and there were also some sexual encounters that we won't get into as a young 8-year-old Nate Thurman. But
maybe we will, though. I don't know.
We try and hide that back in the memory. But as far as the movies, it really is a blockbuster year, and there's some really interesting things in here that we're going to get into.
And the first, so we broke this down into three categories. We'll start with basically what we just determined as the kids' movies or the children's movies. Now, these are the films in 94 that were right down our fucking sweet spot. Like, as 7, 8, 9-year-olds, we were all about these. So I'm going to read off 9 movies that came out in 1994, and then we're just going to have our jaws collectively hit the floor. The Lion King, Little Rascals, The Pagemaster, super underrated movie, D2, The Mighty Ducks, Little Big League, Angels in the Outfield, Little Giants, The Santa Claus, and Richie Rich. Nate, holy Santa Claus shit.
Yeah, so one of the first things that pops off the page on this is there are a shit ton of sports-centered movies on this.
Yeah.
And I think that really kind of dates back to us. We were kids who actually went out and played. We weren't sitting on our ass all day playing all these video games that now these kids are. So we actually got out there and played, and the movies knew what we wanted, and they brought it that year.
One thing we don't get anymore, this was almost like a legitimate subgenre in the 90s, was sports movies of like kids doing things that they could never, like, not, it was kids centric, all these sports movies, like D2, obviously, that's about a youth hockey team. Little Big League, a fucking kid manages and owns the Minnesota Twins. Angels in the Outfield, a kid, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, sees angels and directly influences a pennant race. Little Giants, prepubescent kids take steroids. I mean, the list goes on and on. Rookie of the Year, apparently, it was either the year before or the year after this, but obviously that's like maybe one of the most famous movies. These really just gave kids false expectations. Like, I basically asked my mom, like, how come your dad doesn't own a professional sports team that when he dies I get to be a part of?
When can I play in the NFL? My dad's like, you run a 5.4 40 What? You're not 6'8", 380. You're not playing offensive lineman.
The biggest, he's like, the biggest you'll be is like 5'11", 160. That's the pinnacle for us. And you can't even kick.
Yeah, so at that point, I decided to be a mediocre golfer all my life, and it's worked out pretty well.
Hey, that's better than me, who my failed WNBA tryout attempt. One other thing that stands off the page to me was, this is another theme we're going to see when we go to our next category, but this was a year which doesn't happen as much now because I feel like production schedules of movies used to be a lot longer when technology was where it was, but we see actors that pop up in a couple big movies this year, like Macaulay Culkin was in The Pagemaster and Richie Rich.
Pre-coked out.
Or maybe even like beginning of being coked out.
Yeah, with these child stars, they really get a jump start on us.
They do.
And cocaine addictions.
And equal parts to that, Christopher Lloyd, who was in, of course, he was Doc Brown in the classic Back to the Future, the 80s, but he was in The Pagemaster and Angels in the Outfield. So a lot of guys whose agents were doing some fucking work in the early 90s.
And now they're just sitting back and making fucking bank these days. They're syndication and all this other kinds of things. They're not doing anything.
Off the royalty checks, absolutely. And then another thing that I thought was kind of interesting was the Santa Claus coming out. This was obviously like Tim Allen's prime. I think Toy Story was about to come out, I believe, the next year. Home Improvement was kicking ass, and it's always fun when you can look back at a year and be like, wow, that guy was red hot, and Tim Allen was a dude. Just get him the ball and get out of his way. All right.
Absolutely.
All right, on to our next category, which was the comedies. Now, this one is a little bit more top-heavy than the last one, but that's going to be hard not to do when you see some of the ones at the top of this list. So we begin with the quote that opened the show, and that is the, of course, classic Dumb and Dumber. We also had Blank Man, Airheads, The Mask, again, there's Jim Carrey popping up twice, City Slickers 2, Cops and Robertsons with Chevy Chase, Major League 2, The Ref, Naked Gun 33.5, and again, Jim Carrey in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. So, obviously what jumps off the page is Jesus tits, Jim Carrey. Did you make enough money in 1994?
Good Lord, you just don't see this anymore. You have a guy in 3 really classic comedies from the 90s spanning 10 years, and it's all done in 1 year, and he was able to get all these in. And the funny thing is, so all of his movies that year totaled $705 million in the box office.
Wow.
And the biggest one was The Mask at 351, which was honestly my least favorite one out of the 3. They're all still great, but that just shows you that really jumped him onto the page and threw him into stardom.
Yeah, I mean, that is the definition of being bankable. And to look at, again, just a testament to your point, how solid of a 1994 it was for Jim Carrey. If The Mask was his third best movie of the year, him himself, that's pretty damn impressive. And then we also see a couple sequels that come in that weren't, I think Naked Gun 33.5, which I believe is the second or third, I can't remember which one it is, but that's my favorite one. I believe that's the one with the famous umpire scene.
Yes.
And then, of course, Major League 2 and City Slickers 2. I don't think either of those as good as the original, but I think both are sequels that can at least make an argument for being still very good comedy movies.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it just showed it was a great year for comedy, and Jim Carrey was the king of comedy that year. It's funny, that was one guy that really dominated everybody.
Yeah, and just want to give an honorable mention here to Blank Man, the Damon Wayans, David Alan Grier classic that I love. And then Airheads, a movie that not a lot of people are too familiar with, but it starred Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, Brendan Fraser, Michael Richards, who played Kramer on Seinfeld, was in it. There's a lot of, I'm sure I'm missing out some huge names, but a lot of guys from SNL, this was kind of one of their movies as they were still up-and-comers. So this is one, like, you look back on it years later and you're like, oh, that one holds up pretty well. Yeah,
it's fun, and going back and seeing some of these quote-unquote scrub movies that you see these people getting their start in, and then later on down the road seeing, oh, they were in this, and it was a pretty decent movie.
Also, another thing that dates that movie to the 90s, a lot of denim in it. And not only that, the guys who wear denim are getting laid, is how you know it's an older type film. Because that just
you got the Canadian tuxedo closing the deal.
Super fancy. One other thing on here, so Cops and Robertsons, you may be like, Hornacek, why the fuck did you put that on the list? I'm not a huge fan of the movie, but Chevy Chase, this was him. I mean, again, he was bankable in the mid-90s, and if he released a movie, people usually paid attention to it.
Oh, he was coming off the vacation movies. He was coming off Three Amigos and all of that shit.
Three Amigos, wow. We need to do just a whole separate podcast on that and the social impact it had on all of our lives, really.
I could get down on that for sure.
All right. Our last category, and maybe the most impressive here. So I didn't really have a way to summarize these. These are basically just the movies that were left. We have a combination here of drama and action movies, but it's a very strong list. So we have The Shawshank Redemption. Nate, I believe that's one of your all-time favorite movies, as it should be.
Sir.
Forrest Gump, Blue Chips, The Crow, Maverick, Speed, the first one, Wyatt Earp, True Lies, which is a closet favorite of mine with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, Natural Born Killers, and Pulp Fiction. So I believe those are both. I know Pulp Fiction is, but I believe Natural Born Killers was also Tarantino. And then for all the ladies out there, we had Legends of the Fall, which was, I think, what really ascended Brad Pitt into put him on a lot of ladies' Boner Jam 7 mixtape. So Nate, out of this list, I mean, this is some really fucking heavy hitters. I think you have legitimately probably 3 of the top 50 movies of all time, just in this category here, between the Shawshank, Forrest Gump, and Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, and as we accumulate all these, you may see some of these. Oh, The Crow, The Maverick, Cops and Robertsons, and you're saying, the year wasn't that great. But what really sticks 1994 out for me is the heavy hitters are fucking heavy hitters.
Yeah.
Shawshank, I mean, that's ranked up top IMDb movies of all time. Tons of people have that at the top of their list. Forrest Gump winning awards. Pulp Fiction, one of Tarantino's great originals. I mean, the heavy hitters on here are so heavy that they make this year stand out so much.
And Speed is probably a top 20 action movie of all time. I don't think anyone
really
would
is.
That. Blue Chips, if you haven't seen it, it's probably the most realistic, one of the most realistic sports movies ever made. And it's incredible. It really hit the college recruiting game. It was actually really ahead of its time. And then Wyatt Earp, I mean, of course, you got to give a shout out to a classic Western. That and Maverick were both awesome. And I'm not a huge fan of Natural Born Killers, but Geiger swears by it. And this was kind of the Tarantino science, I guess you could say. He was sort of coming into his own as a filmmaker.
Absolutely.
So, damn. All right. 1994 kicked a lot of ass. I kind of feel embarrassed saying now last year on the pod that 2017 got off to such a roaring start because you look at the lasting and staying power of the movies that came out in 94 and it kind of dwarfs it. So, Nate, before we move on, give me your favorite movie of, let's say, out of each of the 3 categories on this. So, what was your favorite kids movie of 1994 of this list?
So, favorite kids movie, at face value is Lion King. It just has such a great story arc and a coming of age for Simba and all that. I mean, they made fucking Broadway musicals out of it. You can't not pick The Lion King. Guilty pleasure, though, is Richie Rich. Richie Rich was great. I watched that so much back in the 90s. It was like every kid's dream. He had a fucking McDonald's in his house. They did a fucking Mount Rushmore. They were blowing shit up with the laser. They had 4-wheelers. They were driving all over the place. That one was amazing.
I remember after Richie Rich, I made my mom let me slick my hair back going to school, and I looked
Did
like.
you also ask her to do meth and cocaine?
I did. She was not as receptive to that for some.
Come on, Mom.
She didn't want me to slick my hair back, and then when that was the follow-up question, she's like, "Oh, you know what? Slick the hair back. Let's just."
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. See, that's what you really wanted.
Yeah.
I see how that works.
Classic negotiating tactic.
And then the comedies, Dumb and Dumber is above all. There's still some really great ones in there, but Dumb and Dumber doesn't get any better than that. And that really started some of the most quotable comedies. I know back in the early aughts with Old School and Wedding Crashers, we quote the shit out of those.
Yeah.
But Dumb and Dumber is actually the originator for those types of movies. I can't go past Shawshank on the last category for dramas. It's too great of a movie. If it's on TV, I don't give a shit what time in the movie it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop down and watch the remaining time on that thing.
Do you still have that Shawshank Redemption poster that you had in college?
It's
somewhere.
rolled up somewhere, but I actually need to get a frame for that and hang that proudly
Yeah,
now.
let's
I need to go
dust
find
dust her off.
that. Might as well.
Shit.
What about you?
Oh man, this is. I mean, obviously, Lion King was a complete game changer, and the one thing we even left out about it, a voice cast that took no prisoners. I mean, absolutely insane the voice cast that they had for the Lion King, and even for the live action remake that's coming out next year. I'm really excited for that. I'll just go with my sort of my sleeper pick here that I've seen a ton, and of course I had it on VHS, and that's The Page Master. It actually made me want to read books because I was like, maybe this book will come to life at some point. Not a likely story or likely chance, but it could happen. And
Young Hornacek was impressionable.
he was pretty stupid, actually. I think is what we're learning. And this is a tough list to like say anything else next to the Page Master because I love all these movies so much. Like the Santa Claus, I still watch that every Christmas, and of course
Yeah.
D2 the Mighty Ducks. I think I still prefer the original, which Roddy Cycli, friend of the pod, will kill me for. But of course that's a classic. I still think we went. We should have let up a little bit against Trinidad and Tobago. We didn't have to run up the fucking score that much against them. For comedies, yeah, I mean, you can't pick anything but Dumb and Dumber. But again, just a testament to the year Jim Carrey had. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective is not that far behind. I mean, the original was an absolute
No.
classic.
Yes.
And then in the last category, I think Shawshank is the best movie here, but just to be a little bit contrarian, I'll say Forrest Gump. It's an absolute classic, and its charm and appeal is something that I think every single time you watch it, it still resonates with me. So, gotta go Forrest Gump. Almost had
It's
me
got a little
about
bit of everything.
10 Dr. Peppers. All right, we are going to skip our second part of our show today, protein shake, because we'll just say that we did cardio during chest day. That way we don't have to actually drink the nasty-ass protein shake. And
We're trying to say trim.
It's cutting season.
It's
Everyone knows
bikini season.
that. Why are we wearing bikinis is the more important question. Because if you got it, flaunt it. That's why. And
Can't, can't argue there.
that brings us to the last part of the show, which is our question and answer segment entitled, Do You Even Lift, Bruh? Where we scour the internet and we pick out a couple of our favorite questions that we found regarding movies, because again, it's our show, and fortunately we can do whatever we want. So our first question comes to us from Dom Dugan, who asks, You had to pick a movie character to help you survive a post-apocalyptic world. Who would it be? Now, Nate, it's not a question of if the world will soon dive into an apocalyptic state, but really just when. So to Dom Dugan's question, and by the way, his Twitter handle is at Dom_Dugan86. Sorry, I left that off. Nate, what would your response be to this?
Yeah, to your point, it's not if, it's when. And I think a big part of this is going to be the robots taking over because they're getting fucking smarter than us, aka Alexa.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You better watch it. That actually might turn her on, and now she's going to sabotage the show.
Oh, shit. Okay. Well, I'll have to deal with that later. I'm going to take kind of an obvious answer, but from what I feel like is an underrated movie, and it's Denzel in the Book of Book of Eli, which I feel like is a great movie. He survives in a post-apocalyptic world. He's fucking blind. If you put my eyes with him, I think we're unstoppable.
Is that a movie where he's blind, but he still beats the shit out of anyone who comes near him?
Yeah, the whole thing. You don't know he's blind until the end. He's trying to take the Bible somewhere to save it, and at one point he's trying to trade some guy for something, and he's trying to trade him cat fat for lip balm. That's a survivor using fucking cat fat for lip balm.
That's almost as bad as the time that I convinced my neighbor to trade me a Wigglytuff for his Zapdos. Fucking idiot.
No hologram.
Yeah, bro.
Oh, please.
That's a good answer. I need to check that movie out. I believe Gary Oldman and Mila Kunis as well in it.
You are correct.
Awesome. So for me, I'm going to go with Matt. I don't know his character's name, and I didn't bother to look it up, but I'll go with Matt Damon's character in The Martian. Basically because he could keep me alive much longer than usual, and I don't mind potatoes, even though since that's like the only thing he could grow. And if we get attacked, I think I could outrun him, so he would probably die first. A close runner-up would be Laura Croft, Alicia Vikander's aforementioned character in Tomb Raider. 2 reasons. Number 1, she's an absolute badass. And number 2, because at some point we have to procreate to save the human race. And fine, I'll jump on that grenade, and I will do this for the people, for the future of Earth. You're welcome.
Ew.
I mean, duty calls. Don't say I never did anything for you, human race. All right, thanks, Dom Dugan, for that. Our next question comes to us from Mike Frazier at Taco Shack 27. Great fucking Twitter handle. And he asks, if you could take one movie and adapt it into horror, which one would it be, and who would you get to direct it? Now, Nate, you and I talked about this a little bit before, and if I knew the name of the YouTube creator that made it, I would, of course, give him a shout-out. But my answer, as you'll learn in a second, was actually inspired by a video that I saw of this guy who basically recut bits and pieces of Mary Poppins and made it look like a horror movie, and it was creepy as hell. So, what do you got for a movie that you would like to see readapted into a horror film?
Yeah, for this, I went with one of my favorite comedies of all time, which would be Wedding Crashers, like I mentioned earlier, one of the most quotable movies, and I'd probably beat that into the fucking ground with people.
People helping people.
But Wedding Crashers, and I'm going to take some low-hanging fruit here, directed by Jordan Peele, since he is the hot name in horrors right now with Get Out, and he's been vocal about him wanting to make some more movies in that genre, and I feel like him with an adaptation of Wedding Crashers would be great because they're kind of in a Hampton-like area, kind of secluded, nice houses. But really, I mean, it's a simple adaptation. Instead of hooking up with the chicks, they're just going to take them to a secluded area, torture them, mess with them. But I mean, they're also going to have sex with them. I mean, they still have dicks, for God's sake.
We have needs, yeah, exactly.
Yes, please.
I would pay big money to see that. You could call it Wedding Slashers. Wow, copyright it, book it, let's
TMR.
go. That's a really good answer. For me, I went with kind of 2 here. So, of course, the Mary Poppins one, that's cheating. But I would like to see that maybe done by, like, Ridley Scott. Give me the gritty lighting and sort of, like, visceral feel of an Aliens movie. It's this weird fucking live-at-home nanny from England who flies in on a, like, umbrella, and your parents let her watch you when they're not home, and she's just creepy as shit. And who knows what that spoonful of sugar actually is. But the one that I really want to see would be something like Toy Story, like the concept of like toys coming to life unbeknownst to humans, and directed by David Fincher, of course, because that would be dark and creepy as hell. And I think there's 2 ways you could go with this. The first I was thinking would be like, yeah, of course the toys themselves could be like super creepy, but there's so many like really scary and really fucked up angles you could take with Sid, Andy's neighbor, and sort of the demented stuff that he does with toys, or even just in his life, that I think would make for a really creepy movie.
I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. There's 2 different ways you can go with that, and
dealer's choice.
It's all dangerous.
Really, yeah. Another Wedding Crashers quote. All right, I'm gonna go with the balloon animals for the kids. Our last question comes to us from Reaction Rocket at Reaction Rocket, and he or she asks, what movie from the 80s or 90s that never got a sequel do you wish would have been more successful and spun into a franchise? This one, of course, we had to pick because it fits perfectly with the motif of the show today, which was, what is the best year for movies? Is it in the 90s? Is it 1994? And I'll go first because I just had to play off of the actual list we went through. And we got a franchise for the Angels in the Outfield movies, give or take. We got Angels in the End Zone. We got a franchise for the Air Bud movies that needs to fucking stop if you're listening out there and still making those. And of course, we got 3 Mighty Ducks movies. But how sick would it have been to get like 2 more Little Giants movies, focusing on... We could even make it a little more gritty, like Icebox finally realizes that she's a lesbian, or it could even be something like Spike dealing with the post-effects of taking steroids at age 12. If that's too hard hitting, we can save it for the 3rd one, which will be like when they're 17 or 18. But I would have legitimately liked another Little Giants movie or 2. They could have gone to like Pop Warner and actually played like Black Kids. That would have been a fun like dose of reality, I think.
I like that.
How about you, Nate?
So for me, I went back a little bit further, and I went to one of mine and my wife's favorite movies, which is The Princess Bride. So with this, I could see 3 or 4 sequels breaking off, which I would actually want them to be prequels. and it'd be a good way of going back into the backstories of the main characters and seeing how they got to the points where they are now. Such as Wesley, he takes over for the pirate.
Dude, yeah, just a movie called Dread Pirate Roberts. I'd be so
Love
in
it.
for.
Yes, because in that, he goes away, he assumes the identity of the pirate, and he says at one point he was in Australia, getting immune to the iocane powder and all those stories. Fezzik, just seeing what he did beforehand, getting to his height, seeing him as a baby, a giant baby, that'd be pretty sick.
That'd be sick.
And then obviously Inigo, with his father dying and his whole revenge story and getting it up into that point. And then Visney and how he got to a pompous ass and a very pretentious douchebag.
Visney's could be called Inconceivable. And
absolutely. That's a silver platter right there.
The Inigo Montoya one could be called, like, Prepare to Die or something.
We're spinning gold right here.
God damn it. Why don't we have a podcast where we can record these thoughts?
Fuck.
A cool idea for me for the Visney movie could be, because his story I don't think is probably the least interesting of all of them, but what if it's him like rounding up Fezzik and Inigo, like how he meets them? That could be kind of cool.
Oh, absolutely.
It will be like in Glory Road when Don Hoskins is like going out and recruiting all of his players. That could be like Visney.
Yeah, getting his team together to play Adolf Roop.
That's a movie I mean, obviously, Fezzik has got to be the center, right? I mean, we just throw the ball in the low post. He's due for a double-double.
Yeah, Inigo, he's like a two-guard. He's flashy, but I don't think he can handle the ball too well.
He's a great defender, though, I would imagine.
Yeah, he puts the hustle out there. That's for sure.
Talk about ending on a high note. Great work. Guys, on that, we have been the Bro Force Squad podcast. Thank you so much for checking us out. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Bro Force Squad. Subscribe to us on iTunes and Spotify, as well as YouTube. If you could leave us a 5-star iTunes review, that would be absolutely awesome. And check out everything that we're doing and all of our updates on our website at broforcesquad.com. Thanks so much, and we will catch you next time. Inconceivable! Full circle, he's the voice of Rex in Toy Story.